the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, the stories this week. In Germany, some 1,700 priests sexually abused over 3,000 children and adolescents over a 60-year period of time. The bishops of Germany are outraged that this was leaked to the media, which made it public. The bishops were outraged. Also, a dossier of 300 pages was leaked from inside the Vatican that describes a gay network in the Vatican that some think is the reason Pope Benedict XVI resigned. He resigned the day after receiving this dossier because he was overwhelmed with the information and felt a younger pope was needed to deal with this situation. He, Benedict, didn't have the energy to do it. Also, Pope Francis this week met with American bishops to discuss the crisis in the United States of America, but the only thing so far that has come from that meeting is a call by the Pope for another meeting with bishops representing the entire World Conference of Bishops in February to discuss the crisis. And also, the Vatican announced that it was going to charge Archbishop Vigano, the archbishop that started the call for bishops and the Pope to resign because of this crisis, with his 11-page testimony of corruption and evil in the Vatican. They want to charge Archbishop Vigano with crimes under church law for revealing secrets. The problem is that Archbishop Vigano disappeared after publishing his testimony in fear for his life, since he knew what would be coming. But in order to charge Archbishop Vigano under church law, he must be served with the charges personally, kind of like a sheriff showing up at your house with a summons. So the Vatican has to find him. So to find him, the Vatican has called upon what is called the Santa Alianza, the Holy Alliance, or the Vatican's version of the FBI, to contact all investigating police forces around the world, like the FBI or Scotland Yard, to help find Archbishop Vigano so he can be served with the church charges. It is as if the Vatican detective force, using its contacts throughout the world, will bring Archbishop Vigano to justice for what he says is his need to reveal the truth in conscience before he faces the judgment of God. All that, and that's just this week, in case you missed the news. You know, you can't make this up. If I tried to, I wouldn't even be able to come up with it. I wish I had the skill of a detective novelist to write a story of a lifelong Vatican diplomat who is now despised by his former Vatican colleagues and is being hunted by a Vatican police force to face a sort of inquisition. And when he is found, if he is found, I think that book would be a bestseller. People love inside the Vatican type stories. In case any of you want to write a book. That was this week. Several theories and solutions are being floated around to solve the continuing problem of clergy sexual abuse of minors, teenagers, and young adults. One very simple solution is that people should be faithful to the truth of the Catholic Church. That would solve it. But one solution that I heard here in the church, when they had the open town hall meeting and anybody could come up to a microphone and express their views, I heard one solution to the cries of cheers and applause of people in the congregation is the one that I have heard for 50 years. Allow priests to marry. The thinking is that if priests are allowed to have sex, then they would be less likely to be sexually abusive. That thinking doesn't make any sense to me. Sexual abuse happens by married persons as well as unmarried persons. In fact, the primary place where sexual abuse happens is within the family, in cultures throughout the world. This in-the-family abuse is met usually with a rigid code of silence. Sound familiar? The victim in the family receives little support in the family and usually must keep the abuse hidden for what is considered the good of the family. You can see how such a family situation is totally destructive for all that would be involved. But what would the life of a married priest look like? Let's imagine for a little bit. First of all, the issue of money, income, salary, benefits. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the average Catholic in the United States gives 1% of their income to the church. So for every dollar that a Catholic makes, they give 1 penny. That's the average. Some are higher than the average, some are below the average, but that's the average, 1%. The financial support of a wife and children, with health insurance and housing and food and education and clothing, etc., you all know how much it costs to raise a family. On $42,000 a year, which is the present salary of a priest even after 45 years of service, when the average income of a family has risen now to $61,000 a year. And that's even tough going. If we were to meet the expenses of a married clergy, collections would have to rise tenfold from all parishioners. Would Catholics be willing to increase donations to 10% of their income instead of 1%? And then we would have the life of the priest's wife. Can you imagine the eyes that would be on this woman? What she says, what she wears, what kind of car she drives, who her friends are. Put yourself in her place. There would be scrutiny beyond compare, and the pressure in that marriage relationship that such scrutiny would cause, from parishioners' eyes constantly looking at this married couple. It happens often to married Protestant clergy. And their marriages often, I know personally, are under great stress. The clergy wife, even in our church, the wife of married deacons, is seen as a helper to the clergyman, to the priest in this case. What if she wants her own career? Teacher, lawyer, doctor, coffee shop owner, plumber. Does she have to give something like this up because she's married to a priest? The divorce rate in our country right now is at 50%. And that would also affect married priests. Priests live in the world. They are affected by what goes on in the world. Would a congregation accept a divorced priest pastor who then might start dating? And if a priest wasn't married, would he feel to be forced to marry because, oh, father isn't married, maybe he's gay? The pressure that would be on a priest to marry, I would never marry a priest who wanted to get married. I would never agree to it as a priest. To him to be totally free, few those of you who remember that are married in the church, you were asked, are you doing this of your own free will without any force of any kind? If you answer yes to that question, but the answer really is no, I wanted to get out of the house, I wanted to get away from this one, he had money, I felt more secure. If you don't marry of your own free will, you don't receive the sacrament of matrimony, which then allows someone to apply for what we incorrectly call an annulment. An annulment in church law is not what an annulment is in civil law. An annulment in civil law is, well, he was 15 and she was 14 and they ran away to Kentucky and got married, and then they came back to Indiana and her father had the marriage annulled. No. An annulment in church law says this couple never received the sacrament. They went through a marriage ceremony, but there were certain conditions that were supposed to be present to receive the sacrament, like freedom of not doing this of your own, being forced into this situation to marry. They could walk up and down the aisle 20 times and repeat their vows 50 times. They still would not be married. But what might be lost if the church does not see the value of celibacy and no longer supports priests and religious in the vocation that they have as celibates? The requirement of celibate chastity for Catholic priests is not because the church does not value marriage and the importance of family life. No, just the opposite. The church asks her priests to relinquish what is arguably most precious and most dear, precisely because it is most precious and most dear. The priest's willingness to commit to a life of celibacy makes no sense if Jesus Christ did not suffer, die, and rise from the dead for us. The church asks her priests to stake their entire life on the truth of the Paschal mystery, the dying and rising of Jesus Christ. Celibacy is first and foremost to be a witness to the truth of the gospel. The priest's life is meant to be a living symbol that challenges his parishioners to place God first in their lives, above everyone and everything else. The words we heard in today's gospel, we call it the golden rule. What is the most important law of any commandment? You shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Celibacy also allows us, the priest, to be available and accessible to his people. A priest is able to go wherever his gifts are most needed by the people of God without having to weigh the necessary question of a husband and biological father, whether this ministry is good for his marriage and children. In the Diocese of San Bernardino, as well as every diocese in the United States, a priest changes his assignment every 6 to 12 years. That's the rule. Sometimes bishops bend the rules in some situations, and priests are there longer. But a priest can expect, either after 6 years or 12 years, to be moved. So let's say there was a pastor of St. Teresa in Palm Springs, and after 6 years he's married, wife, 3 children. The bishop says, all right, I want you to go to Loma Linda. Am I supposed to pull my children out of school? My wife has to give up her job and we're going to move to Loma Linda. It is this embrace of the charism, the gift of celibacy, that increases a priest's ability to become a true spiritual father to his parishioners. That's why a priest is called father. The technical name is reverend, the real name. For a deacon, it's Reverend Mr. For a bishop, it's Most Reverend. Father is a nickname. Why do we call Father Father? Because he is our spiritual father. Are we going to risk giving that up, that relationship to the priest that I call Father? I wouldn't. If you look at the history of the church very quickly, 2,000 years, it seems like every 500 years there's a major crisis. The first 500 years, it was the fall of the Roman Empire. The second 500 years, in 1054, was the schism, the splitting of the church from the east from the west, which still continues to this day. 500 years later, in the 1500s or so, we had the Protestant Reformation. And now, 500 years later, we have the present crisis. In the present crisis, as in any crisis in our life, we have to remember the power that we really have over the devil. The devil cannot pray. Who's the devil going to pray to? Himself? I don't think so. Nobody's going to be listening there. And the devil certainly doesn't pray to God. But our prayer to God is a power over the devil. So when we're told to pray, we're being asked, use the power you have over the devil. So let's now continue to pray this ancient prayer of the Latin Mass, as we call it, that continues after 2,000 years of Christian history, God's grace, and getting us through crises. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and